details of that to be worked out, but the intent is to hold us.
Second half next year. Second half.
There was a mention of the billiard group.
Yeah, Queensberry.
Yes.
Queensberry is the
Is there any change in the percentage ownership?
Oh, well, no, the Queensberry group has bought into St. Augustine to the tune of 11%.
It's 18%.
Oh, 18%. And that's the only new news related to that. Except for the fact that St. Augustine, Queensberry, and Nadecor have agreed on the joint venture.
So the billiard group will not take any active role in the management day-to-day operations?
I should maybe
Because
answer
there's
that.
18% owners, that's it.
No, Mr. Paulo Villar, who's Senator Villar's son, is on the board of St. Augustine and is very actively involved. And there are also other members of Queensberry, which are working as part of the joint venture arrangements to help move the project forward. So they're a very active shareholder, and they although this is a restructuring of the arrangement between St. Augustine and Nadecor, Queensberry were involved in the discussions of how to restructure and sign the agreement to show their full support for how the partners intend to move forward.
Unfortunately, Paulo could not join us today, but when we signed the agreements on October 3, as that picture shows, he was there and accordingly elected to the board.
Sir, prior to being restructuring, how many acres or percentage?
Do you know the previous ownership of the milling company?
The intention was that previously the ownership in the milling company would have been 60% St. Augustine and 40% Nadecor. But under the arrangements here, it will now be 100% St. Augustine. And in return, Nadecor shareholders have the option to take St. Augustine shares.
And with that comes the responsibility for financing.
Yes. I should say that I have been actually involved in this project since 2008, so before Nadecor and St. Augustine formed their partnership. And in the original agreements signed in 2009, it was always anticipated that at this stage the parties would sit down and look at how to join the interests to enable the project to move forward. I guess I would to maybe try to explain that. It's a bit like in 2009, Nadecor and St. Augustine sort of agreed to start a relationship, and I guess as they sort of moved through, they you could say they got engaged a couple of years ago. This is really the marriage of the company. So it was always anticipated that to enable the project to be financed and move forward, the interests of the project needed to be aligned in one company. But obviously that needed the project to get to the stage it's got to today so that the arrangements could be finalised.
Yeah, very important milestone that the two companies come together to be able to advance the project and bring those economic development, or economic improvements, the jobs, the benefits to Compostela Valley.
Queensberry owns 18% of St. Augustine. How much would it own in Nadecor?
Well, Queensberry at the moment owns just over 4%. 3.4%. So without any changes, when the interests are consolidated, they would own around 12.5% of St. Augustine as a consolidated entity.
It says here that the milling company would process the ore and would subsequently sell it. What is it, the ore?
Yeah.
Or the product of the milling?
It is the concentrate. Yeah.
The concentrate, yes. In the milling process, there will be several products that are produced. The concentrate, which is primarily where the gold and copper are produced, will be sold for further refining, well, smelting and refining in order to produce the marketable copper and gold. So there will be a marketing agreement or sales agreement with smelters to process the concentrate.
After the ore is processed by the milling company.
Right. Yeah, it's called a concentrator because it increases the grade, so it reduces the amount of material that has no gold and copper, so that you'll have a higher content of gold and copper, and then you're able to ship that for further smelting.
It says here that St. Augustine is responsible for the funding, for organizing the funding. Are there priority countries or companies that you would want to invest? Let's say more Filipino companies or companies from China. If you were to prioritize Philippines, would you say go for the other mining companies?
Well, that's a very good question, and Ian may be able to weigh in with some detail. Just in general, yeah, we are encouraging the use of local hire, as demonstrated by our TESDA agreement, local purchase of goods and services. When we look at strategic partners, the Villar Group, Queensbury Mining is a good example of a local group that has come into the project, invested, and is working with us. What the future brings, again, that's a crystal ball kind of a question, but maybe Ian can shed some general guidance or thoughts on what that may look like.
I think there's a twofold answer to your question. Firstly, as Clyde has mentioned, the plan to list here, dual list in the Philippines, is a sign that we want to encourage as much Filipino ownership and investment as possible in the project. But on the other hand, the reality for a project of this size, there will need to be further foreign investment, which I think is also a very positive message for the Philippines. In terms of countries, that we will talk, and already are talking to, a number of potential sources of capital. There'd be no surprise to say that the North Asian countries, China, Korea, and Japan, have a big need for copper, and also the ability to bring significant capital. But there are also a number of Western companies that are also very keen on getting involved. And so what this restructuring does is it enables us to speak as one voice. So to give a very obvious example is there's a very large amount of engineering and construction needed to build this project. You can only have one party that goes and talks to the EPC firms, whether it's a Chinese EPC firm or Japanese or someone from Europe or the Americans. So to have this agreement means that St. Augustine has that responsibility, but of course, which is not really mentioned in here, bringing together means that when you talk about St. Augustine now, you should also think of Mr. Caroline and Mr. Romulo as part of the St. Augustine team. So it's really everyone together as one team to then go out and source the most appropriate capital for bringing this project into production.